Our reading this morning comes from A. Powell Davies. He was a Unitarian minister in the D.C. area in the 50s, and he writes this about our faith. We are the consummation of thousands of years of religious history. We are thousands of years that have stripped off superstition and battled with tyranny. Thousands of years that struggled to take fear out of religion, to take it right out of human life. Thousands of years that have marched, sometimes joyfully, sometimes in agony, toward spiritual emancipation. We are indeed the consummation of something. Yet in this world of blood and sorrow, it is scarcely important, hardly worth mentioning, unless in addition we are the beginning of something, unless our religion is new, the religion that has always been new in every prophet who died rather than forsake it, the religion that has been buried over and over again in creeds and rituals and sacred sepulchres, and yet has always come to life. The religion that today is new all over the earth, stammering itself into utterance in every language known to humankind. The religion that says freedom, freedom from ignorance and false belief, freedom from spurious claims and bitter prejudices, freedom to seek the truth both old and new, and freedom to follow it. Freedom from the hates and greeds that divide humankind and spill the blood of every generation. Freedom for honest thought. Freedom for equal justice. Freedom to seek the true, the good, and the beautiful with minds unimpaired by cramping dogmas and spirits uncrippled by abject dependence. The religion that says humankind is not divided except by ignorance and prejudice and hate. The religion that sees humankind naturally one and waiting to be spiritually united. The religion that knows that we shall never find the fullness of the wonder and the glory of life until we are ready to share it. That we shall never have hearts big enough for the love of God until we have made them big enough for the worldwide love of one another. As you have listened to me, have you thought perchance that this is your religion? If you have, do not congratulate yourself. Stop long enough to recollect the miseries of the world we live in, their fearful cruelties, the hate, the bitter prejudices, the need of such a world for such a faith. And if you still can say that this of which I have spoken is your religion, then ask yourself this question: what are you doing with it? So ends our reading. In late 1970, just north of Boston, Massachusetts, a young woman named Joanne had an affair with a young man named Bob. The story is that they had known each other on and off since elementary school and had dated on and off during high school. At the time of their affair, they were both married to other people and had children with their respective spouses. Bob owned and worked at a gas station down the street from the home Joanne was living in. Now, when she realized she was pregnant, Joanne told her husband, Lee, about the affair. Lee knew the child wasn't his, but Joanne refused to tell him who the father was. Thinking that he would not be able to love this child as he did their other two children, Lee asked Joanne to consider giving the child up for adoption. Knowing that her marriage was rocky and being unsure of their financial situation, Joanne agreed. Earlier that same year, a young couple several towns over were coming to terms with their infertility while acutely aware of their desire to have children. They began inquiring about adoption. They had been married for just under 6 years, each held stable jobs, and were church-going folk, though in the eyes of the adoption agency, they were cheating a little on the church issue. Sure enough, the husband, Russ, was a Roman Catholic, but the mother, Carol, was Universalist. Using her experience of being a fourth-generation Universalist and having worked at the denomination's headquarters, Carol was able to assure the adoption agency that it was indeed a real religion. Carol and Russ were cleared to be parents a year and a half after their initial contact with that adoption agency. They were to adopt Joanne and Bob's baby, now named Robin. They were excited the first time they visited the new baby. Russ tells a beautiful story of holding the baby on his lap that day and finally feeling like a full family. After the adoption was finalized, Joanne and her family moved west. They were about halfway across the country when they ran out of money and needed to settle down for a few years. During these years, Joanne and Lee separated and eventually divorced. Lee took their younger child, Art, with him to Florida, and Joanne and the oldest child, Mary, moved on to California. Bob and his family, all still unaware that he had fathered the baby Robin, remained where they were and continued life as planned. Carol, Russ, and the newly adopted child began their life as a new family. This is the beginning of the story of my family. We don't all know each other. Some of us have met. I am the baby Robin. I am the adopted child. I am the common bond between us all, and I am the stranger. Sylvia Nolia Ramos writes at the beginning of her poem, See One Face. When I look into the mirror, I see two faces. When I look at my life, I lead two lives, like happy and sad, like hand and glove, like bitter tears and sweet laughter. I have mastered my two lives. It is in the process of mastering my two lives that I have become acutely aware of the impact my Unitarian Universalist upbringing has had on my life. I have always been aware of the many faces, the many lives I am living. At 10 months old, I was given a new name and a new identity, my first new life. Now, I'm not sure why my birth mother named me Robin, and I may never know. My parents named me Barbara because my mother had always wanted the name for herself. The meaning used in our family is stranger in a foreign land. As an adoptee, I cannot think of any name with a more appropriate meaning. And while I have shortened the original name to Barb, something I did in kindergarten, I still consider it a precious gift from them. My mother was a director of religious education and is the Director of Religious Education Emerita to the First Parish in Framingham, Massachusetts, where she served for 15 years. Prior to serving that congregation, she served a neighboring town, and before that, she worked at what we now know as the UUA, the Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations. Now, my father, who was a good Catholic altar boy, converted to Unitarian Universalism shortly after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated and has been a stalwart member of the Framingham UU congregation ever since. Over the years, if I've done my math correctly, I can tell you that he has served at least one term on just about every committee and task force. But what I love most about his church work is that he is that stealth member who sneaks into the sanctuary weekly to tidy up, polish the brass, and reset the candles. So as you might imagine, attending church was not really an optional activity in my family. I jokingly tell people that dinner conversations in our family revolved around church business more than how our days went. And even to present day, the church is often what binds us together. Imagine, now this is about a 20-year-old story, but imagine, I discovered that my folks had changed their home phone number, the same one they'd had since moving into the house 40 or some odd years earlier. Mind you, they did not tell me that they changed their phone number. You probably guessed it. I read it in the church newsletter. One of the things our congregation does annually is to hold a talent auction where members donate skills to be bid on, and other members bid on those skills. It's a wonderful event. We have fun, and it raises money. One of the talents being offered many, many years ago was that of a genealogy search. As is par for my family, my father and I ended up bidding against one another. Thankfully, I won, And because of that, I was able to further my search for my biological family. So imagine, on Easter Sunday of 1997, during coffee hour, I was handed a piece of paper with 3 names and phone numbers on it. The fellow who had done the genealogy research was certain that one of those names had to be the now ex-husband of my biological mother. It took me a day to work up the nerve to make the calls. But the Monday afternoon after Easter, I talked to my biological mother's ex-husband, Lee, my half-sister, Mary, my half-brother, Art, and my biological mother, Joanne. It was an incredible experience. My half-brother, Art, and I discovered that we have the same hobbies and like the same television shows. Lee shared his regrets at ever suggesting putting me up for adoption. He had been looking for me for several years. My half-sister Mary was pregnant with her first child and had hoped that we would find each other before she gave birth. And we all admitted to looking forward to a day when we could meet in person, with quite a bit of anxiety. Later that spring, I wrote to everyone. I shared with them that I was a transgender guy. I did my best to explain what this means to me and how our faith supported me and helped me to accept my gender. My birth mother, Joanne, was relieved to hear that I had a good family and was a churchgoer. But in further discussing our religious values, she pontifically disregarded our faith tradition and assured me she would pray for my soul. Joanne's reaction was less than ideal. She demanded that I recant my queerness and refused to share any information about my biological father until I did. She died several years ago, continuing to refuse to be in relationship up until the moment she died, taking any information about him with her to her grave. My half-brother Art's wife and I had begun emailing shortly after I came out to everyone. We met a year later, and our connection helped Art to accept me. Art and I met in person a few years later, and we've stayed in touch ever since. The 3 of us cherish our ever-growing relationship, and just over a year ago, we celebrated the birth of my grandniece. I met Joanne's ex-husband, Lee, at the same time I met Art's wife. Until that meeting, Lee and I had a wonderful postal correspondence, back in the day when you wrote letters. But the one exception was that I had not come out to him. I had struggled every day with the lack of honesty that caused in our relationship. It was a chink in my integrity that made me aware of the 2 lives that I was living. Meeting face to face forced the issue of my identity, and he discontinued our correspondence afterwards. Now, when my half-sister Mary and I met for the first time, it was perhaps the hardest of the meetings. Mary seemed more interested in comparing our lives and proving that I had gotten the better deal. She didn't seem interested in getting to know me. I had often wondered, as many adoptees do, I had often wondered what my life might have been like if I had not been given up for adoption. Meeting part of my biological family gave me an answer and a profound understanding of the impact growing up Unitarian Universalist has on me. I wonder if I would have so successfully survived my teen years. Back then, I wondered if I would ever be understood, and I worried that I would never be able to be myself and be loved. Had I not had our Unitarian Universalist principles and the support of my congregation to fall back on, perhaps I would have given up during those hard times. You've got to know that I believe that I'm one of the luckiest ones. My faith tradition and institution sustained me in the hours when my reason and the world around me tell me that my life is without meaning. My religious communities give me love and encouragement when I believe that I cannot continue. And without a doubt, I feel welcome at the congregation in which I grew up. But I don't always know if I will get that same welcoming reception in every Unitarian Universalist congregation I visit. As a lifelong UU, I know that my inherent worth and dignity should be affirmed by my fellow UUs. And yet, I still wonder if it will happen. Not all people who enter our congregations and are different from the existing dominant culture, who are leading more than one life, for whatever reason, feel the same welcome that I feel. James Luther Adams wrote, "I call that church free, which in covenant with the divine community-forming power brings the individual into a caring and trusting fellowship that protects and nourishes the individual's integrity and spiritual freedom. I call that church free, which liberates from bondage to the principalities and power of the world, whether churchly or secular, and which promotes the continuing reformation of its own and other institutions." We call our churches free, spiritual places where people are welcome to bring their whole integrated selves to share and grow. Now, our aspirations to create such free churches are honorable, but we need to follow up with some good, solid action. We need to reform our institutions in order to liberate us from the bondage that says you are not welcome to talk about your whole life here. It is our responsibility to make sure that all people who enter our congregations will feel welcome to share their life stories with us. Not just the parts we are comfortable with, but the whole integrated story. I think of all the people in the world who are expected to check part of their life at the door in order to be accepted and affirmed and recognized, who are expected to assimilate rather than flourish just as they are. I wonder what happens to their integrity and to the integrity of the community in which they are a part. I think of the many people who choose not to participate in our wonderful religious communities because they are worried about the reception they will get. And I mourn for those who have experienced the reception that did not leave them with the impression that they can be fully who they are, just as they are right now. I wonder about our religious communities and what we are missing out on because we let our prejudices, our privileges, and our comfort go unchallenged. Sylvia Nolia Ramos wrote, "I have mastered my 2 lives. Help your congregation master its many lives. Take note of those in your religious community. Notice who is not among you, and question why. Pay attention to the explicit and implicit messages you are giving each other and your visitors. Challenge yourselves to let go of some of the traditions and cultural assumptions that you hold in order to make space for a beloved community that can be. And remember that it is in embracing all of each other's lives that we can learn to be a whole people, one with another. May it be so, and may we be the ones to make it so." Amen.